Welcome to Family Revenge Betrayal. Stay tuned, have a fun time, and let's talk in the comments. Let's go.
At my parents' anniversary party, my mom toasted and then called my 12-year-old the dumb one, while 50 guests clapped for my niece's inheritance. My daughter bolted crying, and then my sister told me, "Don't ruin this." So I grabbed the mic with receipts that would end their little ceremony. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. My name is Tessa Lane, and I need you to picture this like you're sitting 2 seats away from me, because what happened at my parents' 40th anniversary party was the kind of cruelty people pretend doesn't exist until it happens to their kid. Saturday night, rented ballroom, white tablecloths, cheap fairy lights, a DJ playing old-school love songs, and about 50 guests packed in close enough to hear every whisper. My daughter, Marin, is 12, and she was doing that thing kids do when they feel out of place, shoulders tucked in, eyes down, smiling politely like she's trying not to take up air. She was at the kids' table with my niece, Ivy, same age, totally different energy. Ivy is loud, confident, always performing for the adults like she's already on a scholarship interview, and my sister Candace loves that because Candace treats parenting like a competition and her kid is her trophy. My parents, Glenn and Patrice, eat that up. Ivy's the bright one, the gifted one, the future doctor. They say it every time like it's a prayer. Marin has dyslexia. Not can't read, not lazy, not doesn't try. Dyslexia. Her brain processes print differently, and she works twice as hard to get the same result. And if you've never watched a child fight through a paragraph like it's a brick wall, you don't understand the kind of courage it takes just to show up in class every day. The party started fine, at least on the surface. People hugging, laughing, my dad shaking hands like he's running for office, my mom floating around with that tight hostess smile she saves for public. Marin stayed close to me at first, fingers sliding around the edge of her water cup, and I leaned down and whispered, "You okay?" And she nodded even though her eyes said, "I'm bracing." That's what broke me later, the bracing. A 12-year-old bracing. Then Candace swept in with Ivy beside her, Ivy wearing a little dress and a confident grin like she already knew she'd be announced as the winner of something. Candace looked at Marin, did that quick up and down scan, and smiled like she'd already made her judgment. "Hey, sweetie," she said to Marin syrupy. "Did you finish that book you were struggling with?" Struggling with. Like it was a joke, she could say politely. Marin blinked, then said, "I'm reading it," and Ivy jumped in. "I read it in 2 days," and Candace laughed a little too loud. I felt my jaw tighten, but I did what I always do at family things. I swallowed it. Because if you push back, they call you sensitive, and then you're the problem, and the original cruelty gets erased. So I guided Marin to the kids' table, kissed the top of her head, and told her to eat something. She picked at a roll and stared at her plate like it had instructions she didn't trust. I tried to stay calm, tried to enjoy the party, but I kept watching the room like a hawk because I know my parents. I know how they get when they have an audience. They love an audience. My mom tapped a spoon to her champagne glass, that high ping that makes everyone stop mid-sentence, and my stomach dropped before she even spoke because I could feel the performance starting. "Everyone," Patrice said, beaming, "thank you for celebrating 40 beautiful years with us." Applause. My dad stood up beside her, hand on her shoulder, smile wide, like they were the main characters in a movie about themselves. People cheered. Someone whistled. The DJ lowered the music. And then my mom said, "We have exciting news. We've been thinking about our legacy." Legacy. That word. It always sounds noble until you hear what it's really covering. My sister Candace straightened in her chair like she'd been waiting for this line. Ivy's chin lifted just slightly. My daughter Marin looked up, confused, because she thought maybe this would be a normal toast about love and marriage. not a public ranking of grandkids. My dad continued, "We've decided it's time to make things official." He nodded toward Ivy like she was a nominee. "We're leaving the family home to Ivy, and the trust we've established, $250,000, will go to her as well." The room erupted. People clapped like they'd just watched a proposal. Candace put a hand over her mouth, fake surprise, eyes shining, and then hugged Ivy dramatically like they were on a stage. Ivy smiled, and it wasn't a kid smile. It was that trained smile children learn when adults reward them for being impressive. And I turned my head to find Marin's face, because I already knew what was happening inside her before she did. Her eyes went glassy instantly. Not because she wanted money, not because she's greedy. Because 12-year-olds understand what it means when adults announce, in front of everyone, that one child is worth investing in and the other is not. My mom raised her hand like she wasn't finished, and the room quieted again, and then she looked right at my daughter. Not past her. Not vaguely in her direction. Right at her. "Now we love both girls," she said, and the way she said love sounded like a legal disclaimer. "But Ivy has shown real promise, real intelligence. She'll do something meaningful with what we built." My brain went hot. My hands went cold. I could hear my heartbeat like a drum in my ears. Marin's mouth trembled, and she pressed her lips together hard like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart in public. My dad leaned forward, enjoying himself, and said it. He said the thing that makes you want to rewind time and throw a chair. "Marin is a sweet kid," he said, and then he chuckled, like it was harmless. "But let's be honest, she's the dumb one. She'll be fine with a simple life. She doesn't need responsibility like this." Dumb one. Out loud. In front of 50 guests. About a child. My daughter. I watched Candace's face, and she didn't flinch. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She looked relieved, like someone finally said what she'd been hinting at for years. Ivy glanced at Marin, not with empathy, but with that quick kid look that says, "Oh, so I'm officially above you." And Marin stood up so fast her chair scraped. Then she ran. Not walked.
Ran.
Straight toward the restroom, arms tight against her sides, head down, shoulders shaking. And I heard it, the first broken sob through the open hallway before the bathroom door closed. That sound doesn't leave you. It's like your body records it. Candace grabbed my wrist as I pushed back from my chair. Her nails were manicured, grip tight, voice low but sharp.
"Don't," she hissed.
"Don't make a scene. It's their party. They're just being honest." Being honest. That's what cruel people call it when they want you to accept cruelty without consequences. I pulled my arm out of her hand and looked her dead in the eye. "Honest," I repeated, and my voice came out calm, which surprised me, because inside I was on fire. She leaned closer. "Tessa, if you stand up right now, you'll embarrass them." And I remember thinking, so clearly, that embarrassment is the only language my family respects. They can watch a child get crushed and call it practicality, but they cannot handle looking bad in public. That's the actual God in this family. Image. Not love. Image. I walked toward the bathroom first, because my daughter mattered more than my rage. I opened the door quietly and found Marin hunched over the sink, hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. Her face was blotchy, tears dripping into the porcelain, trying to breathe without making noise because she's learned, like so many kids do, that crying makes adults annoyed. I stepped behind her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders, and she flinched at first, like she didn't want to be touched. Then she melted into me. "Mom," she whispered, and that one word sounded like defeat. I held her, and I didn't rush her, because when someone breaks you in public, the last thing you need is to be told to hurry up and be okay. I wiped her cheeks with my thumbs and said, "Look at me."
She did.
Her eyes were swollen and scared. Am I dumb? She asked. And that question, that exact question, was like a blade because I knew it didn't start tonight. Tonight just confirmed what they'd been planting in her for years. I said, no, you're not dumb. You're different. And different doesn't mean less. She sniffed and tried to laugh like she didn't want to be dramatic. Grandpa said it. I felt my throat tighten. Grandpa's wrong. I said, very clearly. Grandpa doesn't understand you. She whispered. Everyone clapped. And I told her the truth kids need, not the polite adult lie. They clapped because they didn't know what they were clapping for. They clapped because they thought it was a sweet old couple moment. And some of them clapped because people clap when they're uncomfortable. None of that is a measure of your worth. Marin stared at me like she wanted to believe it, but wasn't sure she was allowed to. I took a breath and said, you remember your science project? Her brow furrowed. The water filter? Yeah, I said. The one you built with your own hands. The one that actually worked. Her breathing slowed a little. I could feel her brain switching from shame to memory. You know what you are? I asked. You're stubborn. You're curious. You're brave. And you've been doing hard things quietly while other people get praised for easy things loudly. She swallowed. But they don't see it. I know, I said. And that's why I'm about to do something I should have done a long time ago. I told her, you stay right here for 2 minutes. Wash your face. Breathe. And no matter what you hear, you did nothing wrong. She grabbed my hand for a second, like a lifeline, then nodded. I stepped out of the bathroom and walked back toward the ballroom, and the moment I hit the doorway, I heard the laughter again, the clinking of glasses, the DJ turning the music back up, the party resuming like my daughter's pain was a commercial break.
People were smiling.
My parents were soaking in compliments. Candace was already telling someone. We were so surprised, with that fake humility. And I stood there just inside the entrance, and I made a decision that felt like my spine locking into place. Quick question before I tell you what I did next, because I need to know if you're the kind of person who would have stayed quiet or the kind of person who would have snapped the same way I was about to. Where are you watching from right now? What state or city? Because I swear every family has its own version of this, and I want to see how far this kind of favoritism really spreads. I walked straight to the head table and picked up a champagne glass. My hand didn't shake. That's what shocked me. My hand was steady like my body had been training for this moment for 12 years. I tapped the glass with a fork, once, then again, louder, and then the room started turning, faces swiveling, conversations dying mid-sentence, eyes landing on me like I'd interrupted a church service. My mother's smile froze. My father's eyebrows lifted in irritation like, who gave you permission? Candace's eyes widened in panic. And I looked at them all, every guest, every cousin, every neighbor, and I thought, if my child has to feel this in her bones, then everybody here is going to feel at least a fraction of it in their chest. I smiled, polite, almost sweet, and I said, hi. I have an announcement, too. My mother opened her mouth, already rehearsing a scolding, and I raised my hand slightly, like, hold on, and the room went so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in glasses. I said, a few minutes ago, my parents called my daughter the dumb one in front of everyone here. And then I paused, just long enough for people to process what they'd actually heard, just long enough for the shame to start crawling up somebody's throat, and my father's face tightened. My mother's eyes darted to the guests, calculating damage control, and Candace's whisper has started. Tessa, stop. And I looked right at her and thought, no, you stop. And then I reached into my purse, because I didn't come empty-handed, not anymore, and the second my fingers touched my phone, my dad stood up like he was going to take over the room again, like he could silence me the way he'd silence my daughter, and I realized this wasn't just a toast anymore. It was a line in the sand, because what I was about to show wasn't just proof that Marin wasn't dumb. It was proof that my parents had been wrong for years, and the moment the room saw it, the inheritance announcement would stop being a celebration and start being an indictment. So there I am, standing at the head table with a champagne glass in one hand and my phone in the other, and I can literally feel the room split into two tribes in real time: the people who suddenly realized they just clapped for a public humiliation, and the people who were already preparing to defend it because they've built their whole personality around respect your elders, even when the elders are acting like bullies in nice clothes. My dad, Glenn, straightens up like he's about to do one of his "I'm the authority here" speeches, that stiff posture, chin tilted, the same look he used when I was a teenager, and he wanted the whole house to know he was disappointed in me. My mom, Patrice, keeps smiling, but her eyes go flat, calculating, scanning the crowd for allies, because my mother doesn't do feelings, she does optics. And my sister Candace. Oh my God, Candace is white as a sheet, because this isn't just about Marin anymore. This is about Candace's kid Ivy losing the crown in public, and Candace can't handle that. I tap my phone screen and I say, before anybody tries to spin this into Tessa being dramatic, I want you to see exactly what you just called dumb. I turn the brightness up because I'm petty and I want the back row to see too, and I hold the screen toward the nearest tables first so it spreads like gossip does, one set of eyes, then another, then whispers, then heads turning. This, I say, zooming in on a photo, is my daughter's water filtration prototype. And I don't say it like a cute little schoolcraft, I say it like what it is, a working system she designed in our garage with recycled bottles, layered sand, gravel, activated carbon, and a little mesh screen she begged me to buy at Home Depot because she read a research forum and decided particle size mattered. I tell them the ugly parts too. The nights she failed and wanted to quit, the time she spilled dirty water across the garage floor and cried because she thought she ruined everything, and how she got up the next day, hair a mess, eyes puffy, and said, I want to try again, but different. I swipe to the certificate and I say, National Youth Science Challenge, 3rd place out of thousands. And the room does this weird inhale, like they're all trying to recalculate what they thought they knew. My dad blinks hard like his brain is buffering. My mom's mouth opens slightly, then closes, because she wasn't prepared for receipts. Candace jumps in fast, fake laugh. Okay, wow, that's nice. Nice, like she's complimenting a casserole, and I turn my head toward her slowly and say, No, Candace, it's not nice. It's extraordinary. And you know that if you ever looked at Marin for longer than 2 seconds without comparing her to Ivy, people start shifting in their chairs. Somebody coughs. A cousin at the back whispers, Oh my, and that's when my mom tries to regain control. She lifts a hand and goes, Tessa, honey, we didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it like that is what people say when they absolutely meant it, they just didn't mean for witnesses to judge them. I keep my voice calm, because calm is scarier than yelling, and I say, You meant it exactly like that. You said it out loud. More than once. You said it with a smile. Then I swipe again, and this is where the room gets uncomfortable in a different way, because it's not just science now, it's words, and dyslexia is supposed to be about words, right? So I pull up a screenshot of a poem Marin wrote, the one about water being a mirror that tells the truth even when people don't. And I say, she writes too. I can see a woman at table 3 lean forward, eyes widening, and she goes, Oh, that's beautiful. And someone else murmurs, at 12, and I nod and go, 3 pieces published. Youth journals. Legit submissions. Candace's smile cracks because now it's obvious this isn't about Ivy being talented. Ivy can be talented, fine, but the family narrative that Marin is the dumb one is collapsing in front of everyone, and Candace can't stand losing her storyline. She stands up half an inch from her chair and says, Tessa, You're making this party about you. And I laugh, a short, sharp laugh, because of course that's the script. When you call out cruelty, you're the selfish one for naming it. I point toward the hallway where my daughter ran and I say, no. They made it about a child. They made it about tearing a child down while everybody smiled and ate cake. My dad finally speaks, louder than he needs to, voice booming like he can volume his way out of accountability. We didn't know any of this, he says. And I look right at him, and I say, you didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't know because you decided at 7 years old she was slow, and then you built a whole personality around that label. My mom's eyes flash, and she tries the soft angle. We love her. She's sweet. And I cut her off. Sweet is what people call girls when they don't want to respect them. And now the guests are fully engaged because older folks love a family showdown as long as it's not their family, and I can feel the judgment shifting from me to them. And that's when I decide to go for the throat, not violently, not crudely, just truthfully, because truth is enough. I say, you just announced you're leaving the house and the big trust to Ivy because she's the intelligent one. So let's talk about what that really means. It means you're using money as a scoreboard. It means you're rewarding the child who performs in the way you like and punishing the child who has a different brain. Then my dad, because he's proud of himself, says, we're being practical. Some kids can handle responsibility and some can't. And I lean into the microphone, less silence, and say, responsibility? She built a filtration system that cleaned water. She kept a research notebook for 6 months. She tested, failed, adjusted, retested, recorded results. That is responsibility. What you mean is she doesn't perform the way you like. A man near the dance floor mutters, dang, and somebody laughs nervously, and my mom's face goes pink, then red. Candace tries to rescue her parents, because if her parents look bad, Candace looks bad, and she says, this is just family business. It shouldn't be aired out. And I look around the room and say, funny, because humiliation was aired out just fine.
That lands.
People go quiet in that thick way, like they can't deny it. My dad takes a step forward like he might take my phone, and I take a step back, not scared, just ready, and I say, don't you dare try to control this now. And then I do the thing that makes my mom's whole body stiffen. I say, you want to know the worst part? This wasn't a one-time slip. This is a pattern. Every holiday, every dinner, every little comment that gets brushed off as teasing. Ivy's the brain. Marin's the sweet one. Ivy will go far. Marin will do fine in something simple. You've been shrinking her for years. My mom's voice cracks. We didn't realize it hurt her. And I say, she asked me if she was stupid. That's what your teasing did. Now my dad looks like someone punched him, because even bullies don't like hearing the consequence spelled out plainly. There's a beat of silence, and then I hear the bathroom door in the hallway, a soft click, and I know Marin is coming back out because she doesn't want to hide forever, and my heart tightens because she's about to walk into the aftermath of adults behaving badly. I turn slightly so she can see me from the doorway, so she knows I'm here, and when she steps in, her cheeks still wet, eyes wide, the whole room sees her, and the energy shifts again because it's one thing to talk about a child. It's another thing to see the child.
People look ashamed.
Candace suddenly looks away. My mom's face goes soft for a second, then hard again, because she's fighting the urge to protect her image. Marin stands near the doorway, like she's unsure if she's allowed to exist in the room that just labeled her. I raise my hand to her, palm open, and I say, come here, baby. She walks slowly, and every step feels loud. She gets to my side, and I wrap an arm around her shoulders, and I say to the room, this is who you were clapping over. My dad swallows and tries to repair it fast, too fast, the way people do when they realize they've been caught. Marin, he says, forcing warmth, you know Grandpa didn't mean that. And Marin looks at him, and her voice is small but clear, and she says, "You said it twice." 2 words that hit harder than any speech. The room makes that collective uncomfortable sound, like chairs shifting, glasses clinking, the truth settling like dust. My mom reaches toward Marin, and Marin instinctively leans into me, not her, and my mom notices, and for the first time all night, I see a flicker of real pain in my mother's eyes, because that's what favoritism buys you. It buys you a future where the child you dismissed doesn't feel safe near you. My dad clears his throat, embarrassed, and says, "We can fix this." And I say, "No, you can't fix it in a speech. You fix it in what you do next." And that's when I finally pull up the last thing on my phone, the one piece I haven't shown yet, the one that explains why I was so steady walking into this party, because I already knew something they didn't, and I look down at Marin and I say, "Do you want to tell them, or do you want me to?" And she hesitates, glances at the crowd, terrified and brave at the same time, and then she nods once, and I lift my phone again. And right as my dad opens his mouth to interrupt, I say, "Everybody quiet, because this next part is where their dumb one becomes the reason this whole room is about to go silent for a very different reason." The room went so silent I could hear a bracelet tap a glass, and I'm standing there with my phone raised like I'm swearing an oath, because the second my father called my 12-year-old the dumb one, this stopped being a celebration and became a public test of who is willing to let cruelty slide when it wears a smile, and my daughter Marin is still half out of her chair, eyes glossy, trying to fold herself into her cardigan like she can vanish. And my sister Tessa has that frozen grin that says, "Please don't ruin our moment," like my kid's dignity is background music. My mom Loretta's lips are trembling, not from guilt, but from embarrassment, the kind that only shows up when other people can see you, and my dad Glenn is standing there with his chest out like he just delivered a funny line, waiting for laughs that aren't coming, and I can feel 50 sets of eyes shifting between me and them, because people love family speeches until the family gets honest in the wrong direction. I keep my voice calm on purpose, because calm is what scares people who expected you to scream, and I say, "You just label my daughter in front of everybody, so I'm going to label something too, the truth." And then I tilt my phone so the first row can see it, because if you've ever tried to defend a kid in front of relatives, you already know they don't respect feelings, they respect receipts. I scroll slow, like I'm reading out a verdict, and I tell them, "This is Marin's science project, not a poster board volcano. An actual filtration system she built in our garage with recycled bottles and charcoal and layers she measured herself, and she placed third nationwide, out of thousands. And the first sound in the room isn't applause, it's whispering, that sharp, confused whispering people do when their old opinion just got embarrassed." My father's smile finally slips, and he says, "Well, we didn't know." Like that's a defense, and I look at him and say, "Exactly, you didn't know, because you don't ask." And then I add the part that matters, the part they always ignore. Dyslexia isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a different route to the same destination, and some routes are harder, but they don't end at dumb. Tessa finally snaps out of her freeze and reaches for my elbow, like she's trying to steer me back into the role I grew up in, the role of quiet compliance, and she hisses, "Don't do this here." And I pull my arm away and say, "Here is exactly where it happened. So here is exactly where it gets corrected." And I see Marin's cousin, the golden one, sitting at the kids' table with her chin lifted, confused, because she's used to adults clapping for her without conditions, and I'm not blaming that child. I'm blaming the system the adults built where one kid is a trophy and the other kid is a warning label. My mother Loretta tries to soften it with that syrup voice. "Victoria, we love both girls." And I cut in, still calm. Love without respect is just a word you use to cover damage. And a couple people suck in their breath because they weren't ready for that kind of sentence at a party with balloons. My father Glenn starts backpedaling. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant Sophia is more academically inclined. And I turn my phone again and scroll to Marin's writing, and I say, these are her poems and they've been published, not shared on Facebook, published by editors who don't care about our last name. And my father's eyes widen the way people's eyes widen when they realize the child they mocked is the child the world is applauding. And right then, Marin steps closer to me, not hiding anymore, just standing beside my hip like she's borrowing my spine, and I can feel her shaking slow down like her body is finally hearing the words her brain needed years ago. My sister Tessa tries a different angle, the gaslight angle. You're overreacting, it was a joke. And I look her dead in the face and say, a joke is when everyone laughs, not when a child runs to the bathroom to cry. And the room goes quieter, because now people are remembering they heard the bathroom door shut. They heard the sobs, they just didn't want to be the one to acknowledge it. I take a breath and I do the thing families hate most. I slow down and I narrate the pattern. This isn't one comment. This is years of comparison. Years of you rewarding one child for being easy to measure and punishing the other for needing a different measuring tape. And my mother's face tightens because she knows I'm not wrong and she hates that I'm saying it out loud. And while all this is happening, in my head I'm flashing back to the first time Marin asked me, very small voice, Mom, am I stupid? And I remember feeling like someone punched me in the throat because kids don't invent that question, adults plan it. I remember the school meeting when she was 7, the specialist explaining how letters flip and words scramble, and how her brain can be brilliant and still struggle with decoding. And I remember my father waving his hand like he was swatting a fly, saying, back in my day, we just studied harder. And I remember thinking, back in your day, you didn't have to fight your own brain just to read a menu. So tonight, I'm not just defending Marin. I'm defending every version of her that had to sit quietly while grown-ups treated her like a lesser model. I look around the room because if you're watching this and you've lived it, you know half the battle is forcing witnesses to see what they've been avoiding, and I say, if you're sitting here thinking, this is uncomfortable, good, it should be uncomfortable to watch a child be publicly diminished. And then I point at my parents, not aggressively, just clearly, because you too felt comfortable saying it. Now listen, quick pacing break, because I need you with me right here. And if you're watching this, tell me where you're watching from, what state, what city, even if you're overseas, because I want to know how many people understand this kind of family poison. And while you're at it, check if you're subscribed, because our stats show a lot of you watch and don't join the community. Kindly join our community. Thank you. All right, back to it. My father Glenn clears his throat and tries to regain control, and he says, we were making an announcement about our legacy. And I can hear the real meaning. Our legacy equals our power, and he continues. Sophia is going to inherit the house and the trust because she'll do something meaningful with it. And I let that hang for half a second, and then I say, you mean she'll do something that makes you look good? Because that's what this is, and you know it, and their friends know it, and that's why everybody is staring at the floor. My mother Loretta whispers, Victoria, please, like I'm the one causing harm, and I answer, no, you already caused the harm. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. And then I say the sentence that makes my sister's husband shift uncomfortably. You can't call a child dumb and then try to rewrite the moment when you get caught. My father starts bargaining. We can split the trust, we can change the plan, and I almost laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's so predictable. The moment the audience disapproves, suddenly the wallet opens and I say, money is not an apology, it's a bribe. And then I turn to the room and I ask the question that makes comment sections explode. If your parents publicly humiliated your child like this, would you forgive them because they offered cash? Or would you protect your kid and cut the cord? Because I want people to answer that honestly, not politely. Marin's voice comes out small but steady, and she says, I'm not dumb. And my chest tightens because that sentence is both victory and injury. Victory because she said it, injury because she needed to, and I kneel a little to her level and I say, you're not dumb, you're different, and different is not defective. My mother starts crying, but it's the kind of crying that still expects a hug, and I don't move because hugs don't erase labels. My father's face goes red, and he tries to swing into authority. This is our home. You don't get to lecture us. And I say, I'm not lecturing, I'm correcting. And then I gather Marin's coat from the back of her chair, and I put it on her like I'm armor plating her in front of everyone, and I tell her, we're leaving. And I look at my parents one last time and say, you just taught my daughter what you think she is, and I'm about to teach her what boundaries look like. And as we walk toward the door, my sister Tessa follows 2 steps behind, whispering, you're tearing the family apart. And I don't even turn my head. I just say, no, I'm tearing the mask off. Outside, the air is cold and clean, and Marin's breathing is fast like she's been running even though she hasn't, and I buckle her into the car with my hands still shaking, not from fear, from fury, and she looks at me and asks the question that breaks mothers. Mom, are they right? And I put my palms on the steering wheel and I say, they're wrong, and I'm going to prove it in a way they can't talk over. Because there's one thing sitting in my bag that my parents haven't seen yet, one letter. One email, one confirmation that turns their whole little inheritance speech into a joke with a punchline they won't like. And when I tell you what Marin got accepted into and what my parents tried to do the next morning to save face, you're going to understand why some grandparents don't deserve the title until they earn it. The next morning I woke up before my alarm. The kind of wake up where your body is already braced like it slept with its fists clenched, and the first thing I saw was Marin's backpack by the door with her science notebook sticking out, and I remembered her voice in the car. Are they right? And I swear something inside me made a quiet promise, not dramatic, not poetic, just solid. Nobody gets to shrink my child for entertainment ever again, not even family, not even in a room full of smiling
Guests.
I made coffee that tasted like burnt courage, and Marin came out in fuzzy socks, hair messy, eyes puffy like she cried herself to sleep, and she tried to act casual the way kids do when they don't want to be a burden, and she said, Mom, you said you had something, and I didn't make her beg for it. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded paper that had been sitting there like a loaded secret, and I placed it on the kitchen table between us like evidence. Read the first line, I told her, and she stared at it like it might bite her. And then she started reading slow, lips moving, because dyslexia doesn't mean you can't read. It means you read like you're hiking uphill with weights. And the first line hit her like sunlight. Congratulations. We're pleased to inform you. Her eyebrows lifted, and I saw her face change in real time from guarded to confused to hopeful, like watching a lock click open. Is this real? She whispered, and I said, it's real, baby. You got into the MIT summer program. And for a second she didn't react because her brain was still arguing with the old label, the dumb one, and then her mouth opened like she was about to laugh and cry at the same time, and she said, but Grandpa said, and I leaned in and I said, Grandpa said something cruel and stupid, and he was wrong. And then the sound came. Not a scream, not a movie sob, just that quiet, shaking breath kids do when they're trying not to fall apart, and she covered her face with her hands like she couldn't hold all the feelings at once, and I pulled her into my arms, and I felt her shoulders shaking against my chest, and it wasn't just happiness, it was relief, because when you've been treated like you're less, every win feels like permission to exist. I held her until her breathing slowed, and then she wiped her face and said, do I have to go back there? Meaning my parents, the party, the whole stage where they made her the punchline, and I said, no, you don't have to go anywhere you don't feel safe. And she nodded like she had been waiting her whole life to hear that sentence from an adult. I drove her to school, and she sat in the passenger seat clutching the MIT letter like it was fragile, and at a red light she looked at me and said, should I tell Sophia? And I paused, because this is where the story gets messy, because the golden child cousin isn't the villain. She's a kid raised in a system that rewards her and uses her as a weapon, and I said, you can tell her if you want, but you don't owe anyone an explanation. And Marin nodded, staring out the window, and then she said something that made my throat tighten. I want to tell Grandma, but I don't want her to say sorry, like she's just trying to stop people from being mad. And I said, that's smart. That's exactly the difference between an apology and a performance. Now here's the part where you might think I'd have peace for at least one day. But family like this doesn't let you breathe, because by lunchtime my phone started buzzing like a hornet nest, and it was my mother Loretta first, then my father Glenn, then my sister Tessa, and I ignored all of them until the messages started stacking so fast my screen looked like it was glitching. I listened to one voicemail, just one, and it was my father in that fake calm voice, the one he uses when he's angry but trying to sound like the reasonable one, and he said, "Victoria, we need to talk about last night. You embarrassed your mother and you made a scene in front of our friends." And I actually laughed out loud in my kitchen because notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, "I'm sorry I called your child dumb." He said, "You embarrassed us." And that's the tell. That's the sickness. Reputation over relationship. My mother texted, "We were just being practical. You took it the wrong way." And I stared at that sentence like it was a live wire, because what does practical mean when you're talking about a 12-year-old's worth? Tessa's text was worse because she came in with the guilt knife. "You always do this. You ruin everything. Mom hasn't stopped crying." And I could already picture her crying, not because she hurt Marin, but because people saw it. I replied with one line, "I'm available to talk about Marin's feelings, not your embarrassment." And then I put my phone face down like I was putting a lid on boiling water. Later that afternoon, Marin came home with a small smile that looked like it was still learning how to be confident, and she said, "Mom, Mrs. Daniels said MIT is a big deal." And I said, "It is, and you earned it." And she asked, "Can we tell Aunt Tessa?" And I said, "We can, but I'm not letting anyone steal your joy." And she nodded, and then she went to her room, and I heard her humming, a little off-key, but happy, and I thought, okay, we're turning the page. And then there was a knock at my door. Not a polite tap, a firm knock, like a demand, and I opened it, and there they were, Loretta and Glenn, standing on my porch in daylight like they hadn't just publicly humiliated my child the night before. My mother had on her church face, pearls, neat hair, soft eyes that looked practiced, and my father had that posture like he still believed he was the head of something. "We need to speak," my father said, and my mother stepped forward like she was entering a courtroom. "Victoria, honey, we didn't sleep," she began, and I said, "Neither did Marin." And the way her eyes flickered told me that sentence landed, because it forced her to picture the real consequence. My father tried to take control immediately. "You blindsided us." And I said, "You blindsided a child." And he snapped, "We didn't know." And I answered, "That's not an excuse. That's an indictment." My mother reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope like she thought paper could patch emotional damage, and she said, "We made changes." And my father added, "We revised the estate plan. We're splitting things equally now, the trust, the home." And I didn't even take it. I looked at it like it smelled bad. "You think this fixes it?" I said, and my father's face tightened. "It's fair," he said, and I shook my head. "No, it's reactive. Fair would have been not humiliating her in the first place." My mother's voice got shakier. "We didn't understand dyslexia." And I said, "That's because you didn't care to learn." And then I told them the truth that makes people like them short-circuit. Marin got into an MIT summer program, and for a second both of them just stared, like their brains couldn't compute a child they labeled as dumb being wanted by a place they brag about to other people. My father blinked hard. "MIT," he repeated, and my mother whispered, "Oh my God." And here's the ugly part, her next sentence wasn't, "I'm sorry for hurting her," it was, "Why didn't you tell us?" And I said, "Because you would have found a way to make it about Sophia." My father tried to soften his tone. "We can celebrate her now." And I said, "No, you don't get to jump on the train after you threw rocks at it." And I need you to hear me on this because people argue about it all day in comments, so tell me what you think. When someone insults your child, then offers money once they realize the kid is impressive, is that love, or is that opportunism wearing perfume? My mother started crying for real this time, mascara threatening, and she said, "Please let us talk to her." And I said, "She's at school, and she is not your emotional cleanup project." My father's jaw clenched. "You're keeping our granddaughter from us." And I said, "No, I'm keeping her safe from labels you hand out like party favors." Then I gave them something practical because I'm not just here for revenge, I'm here for the lesson. If you want any relationship with her, you're going to learn what dyslexia is, not in a Facebook meme, in a real book, in real conversations, and you're going to apologize to her specifically, not sorry you felt that way. You're going to say, "I was wrong. I hurt you. You're smart, and I'm proud of how hard you work." And then you're going to accept that she might not forgive you quickly, because trust is not a switch you flip. It's a bridge you rebuild plank by plank. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but my mother grabbed his sleeve, and she nodded like she finally realized she was standing in the smoking crater of her own choices. "We'll do it," she said, and I believed she would try, but trying isn't the same as undoing, and I watched them walk back to their car holding that envelope like it was their proof of decency, and I closed my door and leaned against it, breathing out, because the hardest part isn't confronting them, it's keeping your child from believing the old lie when the family machine starts spinning again. That night, Marin asked, "Did they come?" And I said, "Yes," and she asked, "Did they say sorry?" And I paused because I'm not going to sell a kid a fairy tale, and I said, "They said a lot of things, but we're going to judge them by what they do next." And she nodded slowly, and then she smiled a little and said, "Can we frame the MIT letter?" And I said, "We're framing it, and we're framing your science award too." And she laughed, a real laugh, and it felt like watching a plant perk up after water. And just when I thought the day was done, my phone lit up with a notification from a neighbor. "Hey, are you seeing what people are posting?" And my stomach dropped, because you know what comes next in families like this? They don't just apologize, they campaign, they recruit relatives, they twist the story into something that makes them look like the victims. And I opened the message and saw a screenshot that told me my sister Tessa had already started telling people her version. And when you hear what she posted about Marin, and the one thing she accidentally revealed that proves she knew exactly what she was doing, you're going to understand why the real battle wasn't the party. It was what they tried to do afterward to control the narrative. By the time I finished reading that screenshot, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone, because it wasn't just gossip, it was a public rewrite of my daughter's childhood, and it was coming from the same people who watched a grown man point at a child and call her the dumb one like it was a cute joke for party guests. Tessa had posted a long, syrupy paragraph on Facebook with one of those smiling family photos from the anniversary night, the kind where everybody looks wholesome and nobody can see the rot under the table, and she wrote, "Family is everything. Sometimes people get emotional, but we're choosing peace." And then she slid the knife in with a smile. "Victoria has always been dramatic, and Marin is a sweet kid, just not academically inclined like Sophia, and that's okay. Not everyone is meant for big things. Not meant for big things." That was the line. That was the line she wanted the world to swallow. Because if she could label my daughter publicly, then my daughter's achievements become a surprise. And if it's a surprise, then their cruelty becomes a misunderstanding. This is how people like them do it. They don't just hurt you. They also want to control how the hurting is remembered. And then the comments started rolling in under her post like a slow-motion stampede. My mother's friends, the church ladies, the country club crowd, all typing the same pattern. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Praying for your parents. Parents do their best. Kids today are too sensitive." And my personal favorite, "She should honor her mother and father." I'm telling you, if honor means letting your child be publicly humiliated, then that word is just a pretty bow on a box of abuse. I clicked deeper because yes, I was angry, but I wasn't blind. I needed to know how far they were taking this. And then I saw it. Someone asked in the comments, "What happened?" And Tessa replied, Victoria was jealous because our parents are leaving the home and trust to Sophia, who actually earned it. And then she tried to embarrass mom and dad with some fake MIT letter. Can you believe that?
Fake.
She called it fake. She called my child's MIT invitation fake for internet points. And that's when my anger stopped being hot and started being cold, because cold anger is planning anger. And in that moment, I wasn't just a mom defending feelings, I was a mom defending reality, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a private fight she could twist later. I took screenshots of everything, the post, the comments, the fake MIT letter line, the not meant for big things line, and I sent them to myself, to my husband, and to one person who always tells the truth, my cousin Denise, because every family has one person who's been watching the mess for years and finally gets to say, "I told you." Denise replied instantly, "Oh no, she didn't." And then, "Do you want me to handle this, or do you want to handle this?" And I said, "I'm handling it, but keep your shoes on." Then I did something they never expect from the dramatic one. I got calm. I made dinner. I helped Marin with her homework, and I watched her struggle through a reading paragraph, the way her eyes worked hard, the way she paused and went back and retraced the sentence like she was solving a puzzle. And I thought, you people have no idea what strength looks like because you only respect what looks easy. Later, when Marin went to bed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and I started assembling a timeline like a prosecutor.
Dates. Quotes.
Screenshots. The science competition certificate photo. The email thread with her tutor. The poetry publication confirmations. The MIT invitation letter with the official header. And then I drafted one post. Not a rant. Not a scream. A clean, simple statement with receipts, because if you're dealing with manipulators, emotions are their playground, facts are their prison. I posted it where it would land, not on my personal page where my mother's friends could swarm me, but in a local parent group where people actually understand learning differences and don't treat children like trophies. My post said, "I'm sharing this because I'm done with adults labeling children to protect their own ego." Last weekend, my parents publicly called my daughter the dumb one because she has dyslexia. This week, my sister posted online that my daughter isn't meant for big things and that her MIT invitation is fake. Here is the MIT invitation. Here is her science award. Here are her publications. Dyslexia isn't low intelligence. It's a different learning profile. If you've ever had someone tell your child they're less, you already know how violent that can be. I attached the receipts, cropped out sensitive information, and I hit post. My heart was pounding, not because I was scared, but because I knew what this would do. When you bring truth into a family that runs on appearances, it's like turning on the lights in a room full of roaches. Within 10 minutes, the responses started. People weren't just supportive, they were furious. The righteous kind of furious that happens when adults recognize a familiar cruelty. Teachers commented with practical advice. Parents of dyslexic kids commented with their own stories. One woman wrote, "My son was called dumb by his grandfather and he carried it for years. Thank you for saying it out loud." And another wrote, "Please tell your daughter she's not alone." And I sat there reading, realizing this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a mirror for thousands of families who do this same favoritism routine and then act shocked when the lesser child disappears. Now here's where it escalated, because you don't poke a family like mine without them trying to punch back. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because I already knew it was them. It was Glenn, my father, voice tight. "What did you do?" And I said, "I told the truth." And he said, "You're destroying your mother." And I said, "No, she did that when she chose public humiliation over basic decency." And then Loretta grabbed the phone. I could hear her breathing hard like she'd been crying and rage-sipping coffee, and she hissed, "How dare you turn strangers against us?" And I said, "How dare you turn family against a child?" She tried to pivot like they always do. We were joking, and I said, "Jokes are supposed to be funny to the target, not just the audience." And she snapped, "That's not what happened." And I said, "You called her dumb multiple times in front of 50 people." And then I dropped the bomb calmly. And Tessa called her MIT invitation fake online. I have screenshots. Silence. You could practically hear the panic rearranging itself in her head, because now it wasn't my emotions, it was their image. My father came back on. "Take it down." And I said, "No." And he raised his voice, "You will regret this." And I answered, "I regretted staying quiet for years. I'm done regretting the wrong thing." Then he tried a new tactic, softer. "Let's meet and talk like adults." And I said, "We can talk after you apologize to Marin directly, and after Tessa takes down her post and publicly corrects the fake claim." And he said, "Publicly?" Like that was some outrageous demand. And I said, "Yes, because she lied publicly." And he muttered, "You're making this a war." And I said, "You made it a war when you made a child your target." I hung up. And then, because karma has timing, my phone buzzed with a message from Denise. "You need to see this now." She sent me a screen recording. Tessa's post had been shared into a local community page by someone I didn't even know, and people were lighting her up in the comments, not with threats, but with a kind of social accountability she can't charm her way out of. One person wrote, "Imagine calling a kid's MIT letter fake." Another wrote, "Dyslexia isn't stupidity, it's a different way of processing language." And someone else wrote, "Sophia doesn't look good in this. You're using her like a weapon." And that's when I realized the real consequence wasn't my parents being embarrassed. It was that their whole golden child narrative was cracking in public, and they couldn't control it. That night, Marin walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and she said, "Mom, why is Aunt Tessa calling me?" And I felt something dark pass through me, because of course she was calling the child now. Of course she was, because when adults lose control, they go for the softest target. I knelt down, took Marin's hands, and I said, "You don't answer. You don't read messages. You don't carry adult problems." And she whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" And I said, "No, you did something right. You existed and worked hard, and some adults can't handle that." And she nodded slowly, and then she asked, "Are they mad because I got into MIT?" And I told her the truth in kid-safe language. "They're mad because they said something wrong and they don't like being seen." And she was quiet, and then she said, "I don't want Sophia to hate me." And I said, "Sophia is not your enemy, but you are not responsible for making grown-ups behave either." And she leaned into me, and I could feel her heartbeat steadying like she was borrowing calm from my body. And right then, my phone lit up with a new notification, an email. Subject line, "Urgent. Legal notice." And my stomach dropped because I knew exactly what that meant in families like mine. When manipulators can't win with shame, they reach for paperwork. And when you hear what my father threatened next, and the one person who stepped forward from inside the family system and finally told the truth about what they've been doing behind the scenes for years, you're going to understand why this was never just about a party, it was about control. The email subject line said, "Urgent. Legal notice," and for a split second my brain did that old childhood thing where it tries to blame itself first, like maybe I deserved it for speaking up, and then I caught myself. Because grown people who threaten lawsuits over a child being called dumb are not protecting peace. They're protecting power, and I wasn't about to flinch. I clicked it, and there it was, a stiff little PDF attached from a local attorney in Portland, full of dramatic language about defamation and false statements harming reputation, and it demanded I remove all posts and recordings within 24 hours, or they would pursue all available legal remedies. It was classic intimidation packaging, the kind of thing bullies send when they've got nothing but pride left, and what made my stomach twist wasn't fear, it was the audacity. Because the facts weren't fuzzy. The dumb one comment happened in front of witnesses. The Facebook post calling my child, not meant for big things, and the MIT letter, fake, was screenshotted. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a smear campaign that backfired, and now they wanted to sue me into silence. I didn't call my parents. I didn't respond emotionally. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend of mine in Austin who owes me a favor, and then I sent a second email to my daughter's school counselor with a simple message. Please note that extended family may attempt contact. My child is not to be released to anyone but me, and we have a situation involving harassment. Because when people lose control, they stop caring who they hurt. They go after access. They go after leverage. And my leverage was not money, it was Marin. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the anniversary party like a security camera feed, the clink of my mother's glass, the warm lighting, the smell of roast meat, the way guests laughed too loudly like they were trying to prove they belonged, and then my father's voice, casual and cruel. She's the dumb one. Like he was naming a family dog, and I swear, the most poisonous part wasn't the insult. It was how comfortable he was saying it. Like he'd been saying it for years in private and finally got brave enough to say it out loud. In the morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and then a text from my cousin Denise. They're calling around. They're trying to get people to say you're unstable. Of course they were. The moment you refuse to play your role in a toxic family, they don't just get mad, they start building a narrative that makes your boundaries look like a mental illness. I took Marin to school myself, walked her to the front doors, kissed her forehead, and I told her, if anyone says your name or asks questions, you go straight to Mrs. Lowell. And she nodded like a little soldier trying to be brave, and I watched her disappear into the hallway, and I felt that hard mother instinct lock in like a seatbelt. I drove home, and my phone buzzed with an email reply from my lawyer friend. He didn't sugarcoat it. He wrote, "This is a scare letter. Truth is a defense. Screenshots matter. Witnesses matter. Also, they can't claim defamation when the statements are opinion or a demonstrable fact. Do not delete anything. Do not respond directly. We respond once, clean, and then we go silent." That's what I needed. A plan, not a pep talk. I printed the C. Sandazis letter, put it in a folder, and I started building what I called the reality binder. Screenshots in chronological order. Names of witnesses from the party. A list of every attempt they made to contact Marin. Copies of the MIT invite and the science competition placement. I even included the screenshots of the parent group comments because it showed public reaction to their own words, not something I invented. Then I did the thing they never expect. I called Rachel, not to fight, to test her. Because if there was any chance of de-escalation, it would come from the one person who still had access to my parents' living room without being treated like a traitor. She answered on the second ring, voice already defensive. "Victoria, what is going on? Mom is devastated." I said, "Rachel, I'm going to ask you a question and I want a straight answer. Did Dad call Marin the dumb one at the party?" She paused, and in that pause I heard years of family choreography, the hesitation before choosing loyalty over truth. "He didn't mean it like that," she started, and I cut in calm. "That's not an answer. Yes or no?" Another pause, and then she exhaled. "Yes," he said it. I said, "And did Tessa post online that Marin's MIT invitation was fake?" Rachel's tone sharpened. She was angry. She shouldn't have said that. I said, "So yes." Rachel tried to pivot to the usual script. "You embarrassed them in front of everyone. You made a scene." And I told her, "I didn't make a scene. I stopped one. Because what you call a scene is just the moment the family can't pretend anymore." She went quiet, and then she said something that surprised me. Something small but real. "Sophia's been crying." I didn't gloat. I didn't attack. I asked, "Why is she crying?" Rachel said, "Because people are messaging her." They're saying her grandparents are cruel. They're saying she's the favorite. She feels like she did something wrong. And right there was the truth nobody in that family wanted to say out loud. Favoritism doesn't just hurt the child who gets pushed down. It also poisons the child who gets lifted up because it teaches them love is conditional and someone always has to lose. I said, Sophia didn't do anything wrong. The adults did. Rachel's voice cracked for a second, and then she snapped back into armor. Mom and Dad are meeting with an attorney. They think you're trying to take their money. I actually laughed, one sharp laugh, because the accusation was so backwards it was almost funny. Rachel, I haven't asked for a dime. I don't want their trust fund. I want them to stop labeling my child like she's broken merchandise. Rachel said, Then why won't you just take the post down? And I answered, because the post isn't the problem. The truth is the problem for them. They're not upset I lied. They're upset I told the truth in public. That hit a nerve. I could tell because Rachel got quiet again, and then she said, Tessa is saying you've always been jealous. There it was. The oldest trick. When they can't argue the facts, they attack your motives. I said, Jealous of what? Rachel, watching my kid get insulted for entertainment. Rachel didn't answer. Then she said, Mom wants to apologize. I said, No. Mom wants to repair her image. A real apology starts with learning what dyslexia is and admitting she was wrong without adding excuses, and it happens directly to Marin, not to me, and it happens without demands. Rachel sighed like she was tired of holding up the family's lies, and then she whispered, Dad is furious because the donor board at the museum called him. That sentence mattered, because my parents' whole identity was built on being respected, not being good, being seen as good. Rachel continued, Someone forwarded your post. They asked why he would speak that way about a child. And suddenly I understood why the legal notice came so fast. It wasn't about my feelings. It wasn't even about Marin. It was about consequences reaching their social circle. That's when the call came in from an unknown number again, and I knew it was my father because nobody else breathes into a phone like they're about to deliver a verdict. I answered, put it on speaker, and kept my hands on the table so I wouldn't shake. Victoria, Glenn said, voice low, You're going to fix this today. I said, You're going to stop contacting my child. He ignored that like I hadn't spoken. Your mother is sick over this. People are talking. You will remove those posts. I said, You called my child dumb. He snapped, You're twisting words. I said, You said what you said. He tried to bulldoze again. We are offering to split the trust. We are being generous. But if you keep this up, you'll get nothing. And that's when I realized the lawsuit threat wasn't their first weapon. Money was. They were trying to dangle the inheritance like a leash, because that's how they've controlled the family for decades, by making love feel like a paycheck. I said, Keep your money. He went silent for a beat, like he couldn't process a world where his carrot didn't work. Then he hissed, Then you're dead to us. And I said, You already treated my daughter like she was dead to your respect. I'm just making it official. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, You think you're protecting her, but I can make sure that MIT thing never happens. My throat tightened. What did you just say? I asked. He backtracked fast. I mean, people talk. Opportunities disappear. And now I had it. The real escalation. Not legal. Not social. Direct sabotage. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I said, slow and clear, if you contact any program, any school, any sponsor, any person connected to my child, I will document it and I will take it to the police and to the school district and to the court. He scoffed. You wouldn't. And I said, Try me. Then I hung up And I sat there staring at my own kitchen wall, hearing only the refrigerator hum, and I realized the story had crossed a line from family drama into something uglier. When someone threatens a child's future because their ego got bruised, that's not pride, that's malice. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything because I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I was going to go on offense quietly, legally, and permanently, and the next thing I did, the next email I sent, the next person I contacted, it set off a chain reaction inside my family that they could not stop. And when you hear who reached out to me first begging for a private meeting, and why they were suddenly terrified of what Marin's MIT connection could expose about their legacy, you're going to understand why some families don't fear truth until it comes with names, dates, and consequences. I didn't go on offense in some dramatic movie way with a microphone and a viral rant. I did it the boring way that actually works, the way people with real power fear. I opened my laptop, I created a clean folder labeled Mara, I dated every file, and then I started building a timeline like I was assembling evidence for court because that's what it was now. Not family gossip, not holiday tension, evidence. First, I wrote down exactly what was said at the party while it was still fresh, word for word, who said it, where they were standing, who was close enough to hear it, and then I pulled the guest list from Rachel's public Facebook event page and matched names to faces, because people love to clap at cruelty until someone asks them to sign their name next to it. Then I called the venue manager where the anniversary party was held and asked a simple question in my calmest voice. Do you have security cameras near the banquet area, and do you retain footage for at least 30 days? He hesitated and then said, "We do, ma'am." And I asked what he needed for me to preserve it, and he said an email request. And then I sent it immediately, polite, professional, no emotions, just a preservation request, because once the footage is gone, it becomes he said, she said, and I was done living in that fog. And then I emailed Marin's school counselor again and asked them to document that my father threatened to interfere with her opportunities, not because I wanted drama at the school, but because I wanted a paper trail if he tried anything stupid. That's the part people don't understand about protecting a child. It's not just hugging them when they cry, it's building walls they can't see. And while I was doing all that, my phone lit up with a message from Denise again. Except this time it wasn't gossip, it was warning. Your dad is calling people. He's asking who can talk sense into you, and he's implying you're having a breakdown. I stared at that text, and I swear my first thought was, isn't it funny how the person who publicly called a 12-year-old dumb is now the one claiming the adult mother is unstable? That's how hypocrisy works. It's not accidental. It's strategic. It's a smokescreen. Because if they can paint you as irrational, they can dismiss everything you say without addressing what they did. And then I did something that felt petty but was actually protective. I opened my social media and I changed every privacy setting. I removed every school name, every tag, every location, because the first rule when a narcissist gets desperate is they start hunting for leverage like a starving animal. Then I texted Rachel one line. Tell Dad if he contacts any program or school, my attorney will respond. She replied 3 minutes later with, he doesn't have an attorney, he's just angry. And that right there told me everything, because anger is always the costume fear wears when it's about to lose control. That afternoon, I picked Marin up from school, and she climbed into the passenger seat holding her backpack like a shield, and she asked, Mom, am I in trouble? I felt my heart crack, because that question doesn't come from one party. It comes from years of adults making a child feel like their existence is an inconvenience. And I said, no, baby, you're not in trouble. You're the reason I'm not backing down. And then she said, so small it barely made sound, Grandpa thinks I'm stupid. I pulled over into a grocery store parking lot because I refused to have those conversations at 60 miles per hour, and I turned toward her and I said, listen to me, dyslexia is not stupid. It's a different wiring, and the proof is your work, your filter project, your poems, that MIT letter. Those are receipts, not opinions. And then she looked at me with that scared brave face kids get when they're trying to believe you, And she said, "But they clapped for Sophia." And I didn't insult Sophia, because this is where adults mess up. They turn it into a kid versus kid war, and I said, "Sophia didn't ask for that, but the grown-ups turn love into a contest, and that is their sin, not yours." She nodded, and then she surprised me by asking, "Are we still going to MIT if they're mad?" And I said, "We're going to MIT because you earned it, and nobody gets to revoke what you earned." When we got home, there was a package on my porch. No return address, just my name in my mother's handwriting. And I knew before I opened it that it was going to be either a bribe or a performance apology, because those are the only two languages my mother speaks when she's cornered. Inside was a pearl bracelet, the kind she buys when she wants to look classy while doing something ugly, and a note that said, "For our sweet girl, we love you. Let's move forward as a family." No mention of the word dumb. No mention of dyslexia. No mention of accountability. Just move forward, which is code for shut up and let us keep our image. Marin saw it, and her eyes lit up for half a second because she's a kid and shiny things are tempting, and then she looked at me like she was asking permission to want it, and I told her, "We're not taking gifts from people who won't respect you," and I put it back in the box and sealed it like it was contaminated. And then, because I'm not raising a child to be scared of conflict, I said, "You get to decide what you want to say to them someday, not today, but someday, and it can be simple." And she said, "Like what?" And I said, "Like, you were wrong about me." That night, I got a call from a number I didn't know, and I almost didn't answer. But something in my gut said this was important, and it was the coordinator from the MIT youth program. Polite voice, brisk professional tone, and she said, "Hi, this is Dr. Lee's office. We received an inquiry from a family member asking questions about your daughter's placement and eligibility, and I wanted to verify that only you are authorized to discuss her application." My hands went cold because my father had tried it already. He actually tried to interfere, and I said, "Yes, only me," and she said, "Thank you, we will note that, and for your peace of mind, we do not discuss minor applicants with anyone outside the legal guardian." I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there staring at the wall, because the threat wasn't theoretical anymore, it was real. He reached out. And then I did the thing I didn't want to do. I called my attorney friend back, and I said, "He contacted MIT. And my friend's voice changed instantly, no more casual advice, now it was sharp. "Okay, now we document, and we send a formal notice today." And he drafted a short letter that basically said, "Cease contact with any educational institution regarding the minor child. All communication through counsel. Further interference will be considered harassment and potential tortious interference." I didn't care about the fancy words. I cared about the message. You don't get to touch her future. I emailed it to my father, my mother, and yes, I copied Rachel because sunlight changes behavior. 10 minutes later, Rachel called me crying. Not dramatic crying, real crying, and she said, "Victoria, you didn't have to include me." And I said, "Rachel, you're included because you were there when they did it, and you can either keep being a bystander or you can be a witness." She went quiet, and then she whispered, "Dad is losing it." And I asked, "Losing it how?" And she said, "He's screaming that you're ruining the family, that you're turning everyone against him, and Mom keeps saying you're ungrateful." Ungrateful. For what, exactly? For the privilege of having my child insulted in public. And here's where I want to pull you into this for a second, because I need your judgment, not your sympathy, and be honest with me. Do you think a grandparent crosses the line the moment they label a child like that? Or do you think the real line is when they double down and try to sabotage her opportunities? Because I'm telling you, that second part is what made me realize this wasn't just ignorance, it was cruelty with intention. Also, if you're watching right now and you've ever been the kid who got labeled or the parent who had to fight for your child's dignity, kindly join our community and subscribe. Thank you, alright, because you're not alone in this. And the comment section is where people finally say the quiet part out loud. The next day, the fallout started in a way I didn't expect, not at home, but in my parents' own circle, because once you put something in writing, it stops being a family rumor and starts being a risk. My mother's friend Linda, the one who runs a charity auctions and acts like she invented manners, called Rachel and asked, "Why is Glenn contacting MIT about a child?" And then another person asked why the dumb one comment happened in the first place, and suddenly my parents' perfect image started leaking. Rachel told me later that my father tried to spin it as concern, like he was just trying to verify the program, and Linda apparently said, "Concern doesn't look like intimidation." I laughed when I heard that, not because it was funny, but because finally, an adult outside the family was using normal moral logic. And then came the twist that changed everything. The one that made me realize my parents weren't just playing favorites. They were hiding something, because that evening I got an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a man named Carl who used to work with my father on the trust paperwork, and the subject line was, "Please call me. It's about the trust and what Glenn told you at the party." My stomach dropped, because nobody emails like that unless there's smoke behind it. And when I opened it, the first sentence made my chest tighten. "Victoria, I was at the anniversary party. I heard what was said about your daughter, and I need you to know the inheritance announcement was not the full truth." And then, right as my brain started connecting dots I didn't even want to connect, my phone rang again, and this time it was my mother, and she didn't sound proud or angry. She sounded scared, and she said, "Victoria, we need to talk privately, not like this, not with lawyers, please." And I could hear my father in the background barking something about "don't admit anything." And that's when I knew the next layer wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about what they stood to lose. And when you hear what Carl told me about the trust, why Sophia was never the real reason, and what my father was trying to cover up using my child as a distraction, you're going to understand why some people will sacrifice a kid's dignity to protect their own secret. I sat there with that email from Evan open on my screen, and my mother's trembling voicemail playing over and over like a haunted recording, and I realized something ugly and clarifying all at once. My parents didn't just insult my child, they used her as a smoke bomb, because when people are hiding a mess, they love to start a fire somewhere else so nobody looks at the kitchen. I called Evan back immediately, and I kept my voice soft, steady, the way you talk when you're trying not to spook someone holding a truth you need, and he answered on the second ring like he was waiting with the phone in his hand, and he said, "Tessa, I don't want to get dragged into family drama." And I said, "You already are, because my daughter got dragged first." And then there was a pause, and he exhaled like someone finally setting down a weight, and he said, "Okay, here's what you need to know. The trust and the house aren't as clean as your father pretends, and that announcement was a distraction." My stomach clenched, and I asked him to start at the beginning, slowly, because I needed details, not vibes, and he told me my father, Frank, had quietly amended paperwork twice in the past 3 years. Once after he took a loan against the house, and again after he moved money out of the trust into something he called a temporary holding account. And the only reason Evan knew was because Frank had asked him a year ago to explain it in plain English if anyone ever asks. And Evan said he thought it was odd then, but now it made sense, because Frank didn't want anyone asking. I felt my whole body heat up with that cold anger that makes your hands go numb, and I said, "So the trust is missing money." And Evan didn't say yes, he didn't say no, he said, "The trust has been used." And I said, "Used for what?" And he hesitated again, and then he said, "Frank had tax problems, and then there was a medical bill situation, and then there was a bad investment. And he's been patching holes like a man plugging a leaking boat with whatever shirt is closest." And you know what hit me hardest? It wasn't even the money. It was the pattern, because my father has always been allergic to accountability, the type of man who will insult a child before he admits he made a mistake as a grown man. And then Evan said the sentence that made everything snap into focus. He said, "Tessa, the reason they crowned Maddie publicly is because Maddie's mother, Dana, would never question it. She benefits from it. But you would, because you ask questions, and Frank can't control questions." I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall because I could see it now. The whole ugly strategy. Pick a favorite grandchild, make it about merit, label Lily as the dumb one. And then anybody who questions the trust distribution looks like they're just being emotional and defensive, not financially suspicious. It's genius in the most disgusting way. Weaponize a child's learning difference to protect an adult secret. I thanked Devin, asked him to forward me anything he had, anything, notes, emails, dates, and he said he'd send what he could without breaking laws. And then he added, quiet, "I'm sorry about what happened to Lily." And I said, "So am I, but I'm not done." 10 minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was my mother, Marjorie, and I answered this time, not because I missed her, but because I wanted to hear how she'd lie when she was scared, and she didn't even do the fake sweet voice. She went straight into panic. "Tessa, your father is under a lot of stress. You're making this worse." And I said, "I didn't make him call my child dumb in front of 50 people. And she said, "That was a mistake. We were celebrating. Things were said, like cruelty. Is a spilled drink you blot with a napkin?" And I said, "No, Mom." It wasn't one thing said. It was a reveal of how you've thought for years. And then I heard my father in the background, low but sharp. "Hang up. Don't say anything." And she whispered, "Please stop digging." And that's when I knew it was true, because innocent people don't beg you to stop asking. I said, "Is the trust missing money?" And my mother made this tiny sound, like her throat closed, and then she tried to pivot. "Lily is smart. We know that now." And I cut her off, answer the question, and she started crying, real tears. But they weren't for Lily. They were for the consequence, and she said, "It's complicated." And I said, "Complicated is what you call lies when you're tired." Then my father grabbed the phone, and his voice came in like a slammed door. "You've always been dramatic, Tessa." And I could almost see his face, that smug squint, the posture of a man who thinks volume equals authority, and he said, "You're trying to destroy us." And I said, "No, you destroyed yourselves when you used my child as a decoy." And he snapped, "You're not getting a dime." And I said, "I don't want your dime. I want you away from my daughter." And then he hissed, "You think you're better than your family?" And I said, "I think my daughter deserves basic human respect, and if that's better to you, that says everything." He went quiet for a second, and then he said the worst thing he could have said, the thing that told me he still didn't get it. "If Lily would just act normal, people wouldn't think." And I hung up because I'm not letting my child's dignity be debated like a budget item. I went straight to Lily's room, and she was on her bed with her science notebook open, sketching something with her tongue stuck out in concentration, and when she looked up and saw my face, she asked, "Is Grandma mad at me?" And I sat beside her and I said, "Listen to me. You didn't cause any of this. Grown-ups make choices and then try to blame kids because it's easier." And she said, "So, why did they call me that?" And I took a breath, and I told her the truth in a way a child can carry, without being crushed, because they don't understand dyslexia, and because they wanted to feel powerful for a moment, and it was wrong. She nodded slowly, and then she asked, "Are we still going to MIT?" And I smiled, because in the middle of all this mess, she still had her eyes on the horizon, and I said, "Yes, and we're going to go like we own the ground we walk on." The next day, I did the thing people hate because it's quiet and effective. I didn't argue, I didn't post, I didn't plead. I filed a formal written notice through my attorney stating my parents were not to contact any school or program connected to Lily, and I sent a copy to MIT and to her school counselor, and then I asked Evan for documentation of trust amendments and liens. And then I requested public records on the property, because here's the funny part about secrets. They're often sitting in plain sight if you know where to look. 2 days later, my attorney called me and said, "There's a lien on your parents' home." And I felt my chest go tight, because that meant the legacy speech was a costume on top of a mess. And then he added, "And there's evidence of a home equity line of credit that was recently maxed." And now I knew why they wanted the trust talk public, because they needed everyone clapping at a fairy tale so nobody asked why the castle had cracks. That weekend Dana called me, my sister, and her voice was ice. "What are you doing?" And I said, "Protecting my daughter." And she said, "You're embarrassing Mom and Dad." And I said, "They embarrassed themselves." And she snapped, "Maddie shouldn't suffer because Lily can't keep up." And I swear I could hear the old poison in her words, like she was repeating what our parents taught her. And I said, "Dana, if you think dyslexia is can't keep up, you're part of the problem." And she said, "So, you want to take Maddie's inheritance?" And I said, "I want the truth, and if the truth affects your benefits, that's not my responsibility." And then I asked her, "Be honest, did you know that trust had been touched?" And she went silent, and that silence was loud. And I want you to answer this like you're sitting at the table with me. Do you think Dana was complicit or just conveniently blind because it paid well? Because I've seen both kinds in families, the one who helps push the knife and the one who pretends they didn't notice the blood. Here's the payoff you've been waiting for, though. The moment the mask slipped in public again, because the next family gathering was my cousin's engagement dinner, and guess who showed up acting like nothing happened? My parents, dressed up, smiling too wide, and my father tried to corner me near the appetizer table, whispering like a politician, "We can fix this if you stop." And I said, "Fix what? Your finances or your character?" And he flinched. And then my mother tried to approach Lily with a gift bag like a bribe and tissue paper, and Lily stepped behind me without me even asking, and that simple movement, my child choosing safety over approval, hit my mother harder than any speech I could give, because her face crumpled for a second. Not performative, real, and she whispered, "Please," and Lily looked up at her and said, calm, clear, "Don't call me dumb again." And the whole little circle around us froze, because when a child says the truth plainly, adults suddenly look ridiculous. My father tried to laugh it off. "Nobody said that." And Lily's eyes narrowed and she said, "You did." And then she turned to me and asked, "Can we go?" And I said, "Yes." And we walked out with our dignity intact. Later that night, an email came in from MIT confirming Lily's placement and offering an additional scholarship support option based on her project's impact statement. And she squealed so loud the dog barked, and we danced in the kitchen like two people who finally remembered we're allowed to be happy even if other people are ugly. And that's the real ending, not the trust, not the house, not the money. The real ending is Lily stopped absorbing their labels like they were facts, and she started treating them like what they are, noise from small people. My parents still tried to reconcile after that, but it wasn't about love. It was about control and reputation, because once the paperwork questions started circulating and Dana started panicking about what she might lose, my parents suddenly wanted family unity. And I told them unity without accountability is just a trap with a pretty ribbon. Lily is thriving now, not because she got a trust fund, but because she got something rarer, a mother who chose her over tradition, and a boundary that taught her she's worth defending. If you've ever been the child who got labeled or the parent who had to draw a hard line, tell me in the comments, did my parents cross the line the moment they called her the dumb one? Or the moment they tried to interfere with her future? Because I genuinely want to see where you draw it. And if you want another story that'll make your jaw drop and your heart feel seen, go watch the next one on the channel about the golden child, who thought the inheritance made them untouchable until one document exposed everything, because what happens next will change how you look at family loyalty forever.